Well, I hope that's on. Maybe it's on. Sounds like it is. Cool. Oh, there it is. There it be. Well, I couldn't do it live because sound issues. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway. YOLO. Mofos. But before we get started with the MIAC, I'm going to do a little mix this morning. What's up, Little Freedom? Would it be what it was? If it was like it was supposed to be. Hopefully you can hear me. I don't know what the deal is. When I hook up with David Dubine, my sound gets all muffled. We've tried it different ways and it still happens. So I just been talking to him on the phone and downloading the show. So I'm going to try to show you guys the articles, or at least some of them, we were talking about Thursday. Now, you missed it, but you didn't miss it. It's on right now. Right after I get high and do a little musical mix. Let me see if I can do that. Well, I'm still like just awake and stuff. Get high and get groovy this morning. Let's see here. Turn this shit off. And turn the funky one on. Look, we're all funky now this morning. I could be doubly funky. Yes, musical interlude. Wake and baking and baking and waking. Let me see if I can set that up. We'll go over here to this guest scene. What's up, Delaney? Jeffrey? Simon? YOLO? Mofos. All right, let me see. I will add a source. Video. No, not that one. There we go. I think it's this one. Maybe. No? It doesn't want to show it to you. But shit, it's on, and I think you guys will hear it, so let's go back over here. So we'll take a small 4-minute Oh shit, there's a naked dude in here. Play that funky music, white boy. Alright, let's see here. I think this will do it right here. That's a dog. And I'm going to mute myself.
I have PhD, Oxford. 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 I have 48 publications, including 23 books. I've studied health, medicine, anatomy, and physiology for approximately 21 years. Dr. Robert Malone, who created the messenger RNA vaccine, has said no one should ever take these jabs, ever, under any circumstance whatsoever. He created it, and he says don't ever do it. So let me explain what's going to happen to the people who have taken it. Excuse me. The people who have taken it are going to die in the next 6 months to 3 to 5 years, for 3 reasons. Number 1, you've dramatically decreased your own immune system by 35%. The first jab did it by at least 15, the second did it by 35. Now, if you take any booster shot, you will die. That's it. You take a flu shot in the future, you will die. The second reason, antibody-dependent enhancement. Antibody-dependent enhancement is what is happening with these jabs with everybody who has taken them. Unless, of course, you've taken a placebo, but there's no way that you would know that. So given that fact, antibody-dependent enhancement tricks the entire body into believing that the cell that's eating the pathogen is eating it when it isn't. It ends up leading to what's called a cytokine storm, which causes organ failure. That will cause your death, and there's no stopping that. No amount of drugs will stop that. The third thing, blood clotting. Everyone who has taken the jabs is blood clotting. If you don't believe me, there's a way you can find out. Take what's called a D-dimer test. What that does is that detects blood clotting at the microscopic level. They're cutting full blood clots out of people right now, as I'm talking to you. Millions have died from the jabs. In your last meeting, you advocated for people to take the jabs potentially in the future, along with wearing masks. And I heard parents say the same thing. So to the parents who are actually considering jabbing their own children, you're going to sterilize them permanently. People who have taken the jabs are sterilized. 80% of women who have been jabbed have lost their children in the first trimester. You can't have kids. You've also injected yourself with the equivalent of HIV. You can now no longer breastfeed, donate blood, donate organs, donate blood plasma, nor bone marrow. If you don't believe me, try to donate blood and blood plasma and find out what happens. You will be denied. Unless, of course, you live in California, in which case they're allowing people to donate toxic blood with spike proteins in it. The jabs create spike proteins. They're in the jabs themselves, and they create it by snapping your RNA in half. You are no longer a human anymore. You are something else, and you are susceptible to countless diseases. Now, here's what's going to happen in the future very quickly.
So you have 15 seconds.
Great. I don't know what percentage of your staff has taken the jabs, but your school is going to close. You will not stay open. You will close because they will fall ill and they will die. That will happen in all of your buildings. It will have. It's already
All right,
happening.
thank you, sir.
I bet it is. It's already happening. Good luck.
Thank
It's
you.
nothing can stop it. It's
Thank you,
coming.
sir.
Anyhow, that was just some stuff I was playing with right there, but I think you guys got the point of it, right? So let's go over here and watch some other shit, or listen to it.
You can listen to MIAC. That's Mini Ice Age Conversations for you, right here on 420 TV. Shit. If I'm not too stoned to play stuff. Anyway, we'll get to that news in a minute. Shh. Here we go. This is the one we want.
Talking about the most important issue of our time, cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the grand solar minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David Dubine, creator of the Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age 2015 to 2035 video series. And I do welcome you this evening, this morning, or this afternoon, wherever you reside on this beautiful blue planet, spinning through the spiral arm of our Milky Way galaxy, on the journey through the universe. Many exciting things happening, as we can see every single week that have said this same statement. Wow, it seems like there's been a ramp up and an amplification in all things distraction and boots on the ground for narrative or agenda push. It's gone into overdrive. Now I seem to be saying this every single week. Before it would happen once every 3 weeks or 3 months, and then and maybe once a month, and now it seems to be every single day, every single week. There's something naughty happening across the planet to get you to do something you don't want to do. Speaking of that, coming off here, grand solar minimum, I was listening to the introduction there. Most important issue of our world at the moment, cold weather crop losses, food prices, food unavailability, decreasing crop yields, but I should say at the same time, restriction of liberty and you not being able to access that food and the hoops and hurdles that are being put in place to stop you from accessing food now are maybe taking over that pole position of the most important things. Like this cold weather crop loss and the crop losses we're enduring across the planet really are the key to every other dot that you're seeing manifest outside in the web, spider web of globalist control. And then again, the weather that we're seeing right now, New York, I couldn't believe this. I had to double check to make sure I even was going to make a true statement here. So I went to the New York Weather Service, or the National Weather Service in New York. The first time ever since 1870 that they have put a flash flood warning in Brooklyn, New York, and Queens, New York. And I was like, okay, that doesn't really seem like normal. So I did indeed check it. And it's very similar to what was seen in China, where the subways were filling up with water, trapping people down in the subway cars. Ongoing as we speak, where you're starting to see a lot of similarities, like that much rainfall in China that had trapped people, and then I don't know how many people were trapped in the underground tunnels, underground parking garages, elevators that were down several floors, and we're seeing the same thing. A lot of people were stuck in what was considered the subway or the MRT. A lot of images, movies coming out over in China, but now we're seeing it here in the United States. Plus, the Earth uplifted 30 feet, and there's a lot of crustal anomalies going on, and crustal anomaly just means strange things happening with the crust that can't be explained, so there always needs to be some far-fetched, weird excuse why farmland just uplifted 30 feet, and we saw cracks and fissures miles long and hundreds of feet wide in Arizona, and the Earth's crust is beginning to fracture and split as we get into the second magnetic field. So, these two things seem to go hand in hand like a teeter-totter, like a balanced scale. The more crop losses and the heavier the amplification is to crush infrastructure, the more the control mechanism comes in play, because the understanding of hungry people have nothing left to lose, and they're going to go be unruly and uncontrollable. So this access to food is going to be the most important thing. So for me, everything that we're seeing out here is a giant, grandiose stage play with the main mechanism and the main objective to get everybody limited and controlled into food access points, how much food you will access, how you will be allowed to access it, and other things that you will have to do to gain access to food. Because the elitist globalists understand that the amount of food we're growing this year isn't enough to feed the full planet. Still a sliver of backup from the last couple of years. But if we have another year like this, which is definitely forecast coming up in 2022, it's going to send shockwaves through and spook factor through the global society that most people will realize we got a huge, huge problem, because if it happens in 2023, we're going to go below and out of the stockpiles. And at that point, what is grown is all the world is what it gets. So this is the direction we're moving to. So understand where we're going with the food. At the end of it, 8 billion people, there will not be enough. Now, I'm going to say that with a hold breath. I'm going to hold my breath when I say this. At the present way we're growing and the present way we are distributing food, there are many solutions that could alleviate all of this bottleneck in about 2 months if the world focused on it. Manhattan Project to revamp our global agricultural systems, and we would not even have to think about this again, and magically all these control mechanisms would disappear in a fifth of an eighth of a second. The only reason all these control mechanisms are here is because access to food needs to be controlled. But again, you look at the way the world's been structured over the last couple hundred years, and all these systems and top-down approaches that we've never needed just for control of society, wealth transfer on different turnings, the fourth turning, for example. And we sit here again at another precipice. But, as we go through tonight's show, and I'm right here with Ransom Godwin from 420 TV Freedomist Films, it's all about your access to food. And if you're looking to the skies, there's very many signs around showing you that we are indeed at that point where it can no longer be hidden. So as we talk about the Sunday law, which, Spencer Heston talked about in the last couple shows, and here we sit, and the Sunday law now for COP26 and the G7, they want to bring all the Christian churches in to tell their people to take off Sundays and all be climate friendly in climate messages during the sermons, which is completely the opposite of everything I've ever known, because you were never allowed to talk about politics in sermons, ever. You would have lost your tax-free status, but now they're encouraging it. You're supposed to incorporate politics in your messages now in the pulpit. So the world is definitely twisted again on a dime. I don't know how many twists there can be before it turns into a stretch man taffy rope of twist where you can't undo yourself. So here we go. Ransom, I do appreciate you joining me tonight.
How's it going, David? Yeah, I was thinking about that. They're not hiding what's coming too good. I've been talking to people about groceries just out of curiosity, what other people are doing for food and if they're thinking about anything. And of course, most people are stuck on the 24-hour news cycle about. At least it does give them a little bit reason to prep with the COVID, blanket across the world of news right there, because it's hard to get around that topic. But just me looking and talking to people, they're telling me that, a lot of them like to pick up their groceries from the back door of Walmart using their delivery and pre-order system through the internet. And more people are doing this. And then they're telling me that, like at first they would get all of the good stuff, the organic stuff that wouldn't show up in the store on the shelves. But now they're getting replacements, or they don't get the item at all. And just scamming through the news articles while you were talking, I mean, it didn't take me but a few minutes to look at there's like FedEx, DHL are warning about supply chain disruptions all the way into the next year. I'm looking at, thousands of businesses are going bankrupt on purpose so they can salvage some of their wealth. And then just this is a good clue right here. This article by Zero Hedge that was surveying a bunch of people about how they travel with their business, and it's almost plummeted where people are not traveling for business. And just these little clues and cues tell me that if there's no distribution and people are not traveling to make deals, that means small companies, including the ones that distribute food, are not making deals, and they're not getting their products to market. This is happening all over the world. It's a complete communist shutdown of products. It's not just going to be the food. It's going to be everything. I've been looking for specific items, and it's funny, that we brought up the ivermectin for weeks and weeks, months, I think, actually, before now there's a big thing about it, and they're demonizing it everywhere you look. It's just crazy to see that these supplies that were generally easy to get, and I'm going to say, people took it for granted, the freedom they had to get these products, are no longer available. So capitalism is shutting down. People are losing their inherited wealth one way or another. Either they're spending it to survive, or they're losing it by not keeping their properties and making their properties produce. And I've been seeing a lot of that. So property is skyrocketing. It's hard to buy property. And I was also looking at another article that even businesses, multi-billion-dollar businesses, are trying to save money by putting their startups in houses, and they're invading neighborhoods, just buying up all the property. At the same time, you have the banks foreclosing, taking people's homes that haven't been paying. So we're looking for, in the near future, and I'm going to say something that looks a lot like the Great Depression. I mean, it's hard to get around that. And at the same time, you see our governments coalescing into a communist style dictatorship, using medical tyranny as the foothold to get in there and start dictating changes that go around countries' constitutions and the little borders that protect their freedoms.
Yeah, two things. Do you think you could pop a little closer to the mic? And then B, are you streaming live on the tube tonight or are you not?
I am not. I was trying to get some clear audio for you, and I was just going to edit the audio later.
Okay, excellent.
And
Yeah, I
do
didn't
I
know how deep we could
sound
go
better now?
because, believe it or not, when Ransom's streaming on YouTube so you can get the images and graphics for stories we're talking about here, getting flagged and, penalized and strikes on the channel for the very same things that we're able to freely talk about here on the servers on Studio A, but, completely banned on YouTube. Let me go into ivermectin for a second. Ransom, we were talking about fish mox and aquamox for fish antibiotics for, that you could be used on the human side of things. But the ivermectin was the same way. Now, just today went out to the farm co-op and all the regular 100% ivermectin only paste formulas for horses, that was all gone off the shelves. There's nothing left. The only thing available now are these dual or tri compounds that you as a human really can't take into you. Horses can, but they're completely sold out of, it's just strictly ivermectin in the paste that's given to the horse. But there's, like I say, other ivermectin doses for horses, but there's a secondary compound in there or a tertiary compound in there. But then when you read up on it, definitely you don't want that in your body. So it seems that the word had gotten out that ivermectin is gone. And then Joe Rogan, talked about it. He had COVID for a moment there, said he did a Z-Pack, some ivermectin, banged down a bunch of drip vitamin C through an IV, and then he's bouncing up and down doing a comedy show 3 days later after he had COVID. So, with a guy with that much power to come out with that big of an audience to say, well, it worked for me, there's going to be a lot of question asking. And I think just even a single episode with Rogan talking about I used ivermectin and I got better, that could easily sell out every single farm co-op across the country of people running out there. A lot of farmers listen to podcasts, especially while they're working. One thing I did notice, since there's more connectivity out in, let's say, rural America now, an enormous amount of fiber optic cables and internet connectivity has been dropped in here in the last year and a half, 2 years. A lot of people are just listening to podcasts while they work. Obviously they can't watch, but they are listening. So think about even 10% of the people that are out in farmland hearing about ivermectin, and then they go, hey, this stuff for the horse, what about that paste for the horses, that 1.87% ivermectin off the horse apple flavor? It's all gone. None left. And just when I talked to the lady about it, I said, hey, there used to be a whole shuffle of this stuff. She said, yeah, we raised the price to $12 and then it's all sold out now. Because I remember, Ransom, when you and I first started and seeing ivermectin mentioned, I went in and bought a fair few tubes, but it was $3 each. And that was the regular price for such a long time for horse dewormer, And then it's $12. That's a 4x increase over a few months and not available. So I'm wondering when this Aquamox or the Fish Mox is going to be unavailable too once you realize antibiotics can be used. So
I don't think it's going to take that much time.
Get what you can get. Yeah, Ransom. Sorry to cut you off there. Get what you can get.
Oh, no, I think they're going to be cutting it off soon because they're already vilifying it. I've seen, all kinds of stories about people that got mildly sick from taking too much of it or taking it the wrong way. And no one was telling anyone to do that. But, with a little bit of research, because I was purely ignorant to ivermectin. I didn't know what it was until you had mentioned it to me. And then I started doing the research on it because of all the hype now all of a sudden and us talking about it. And I come to find out it's a drug that's been used for some time in a number of countries for a number of different things. So human consumption of it has been fairly regular for decades of this drug from a Japanese pharmaceutical. So for all of a sudden them to decide that it's some kind of fringe treatment for things and that you shouldn't do it is kind of bizarre just on its own. So you could tell that they're vilifying it. And then I'm seeing, stuff like, I don't know if you saw that a guy in DC was basically arrested and sent to more time to jail because he watches conspiracy theory videos online. Now, I don't have to tell you that some people view what we talk about are conspiracy theories, whether they are or whether they're not. But the whole fact that people around the world are now finding themselves on the wrong side of the law for doing normal human behavior should be, really scary. And then when you put the backdrop of the possibility that people are going to start being hungry on top of being locked down and their freedoms restricted, it's starting to get a little scary. Now, me, myself, I've pretty much ignored, I guess, governmental society for the most part for my whole life, and I've done okay. But it's becoming increasingly hard to do that. I'm reading articles from all of the phone companies, IBM. Everybody wants to track every single last human on Earth during the time that we know that there's going to be a lot of upheaval, from starvation to government changes, and I'm going to say that like a evaporation of individual rights around the world, because it's not just the United States. I'm looking at it in New Zealand, in Australia, in Europe, all over the place. Not to mention China and Russia have their own little things they're doing. But it truly is becoming a prison planet here. And when you brought up this whole idea of everyone worshiping, kind of taking a day off from work on Sunday, which if you were an Orthodox Christian or a Jew, you would know that the Sabbath is actually Saturday. So it is kind of bizarre that they're pushing that on the, like an entire world governance type system, pushed down through the churches that are now pushing medicines at the church. They're pushing government opinions at the church. So you're going to have to decide for yourself if the religious center that you go to is actually that kind of religious center, or is it just another government mouthpiece, not unlike mainstream media at this point.
Well, the Sunday law is loosely based on 1 day of zero economic activity. Okay, so they're trying to implement this with the new climate, whatever regulations that are coming in from not only Biden's infrastructure plan. I can't believe they set aside so much money for removing all climate, quote, misinformation off the net. I mean, they put millions and millions of dollars inside to have fact checkers go and then label channels that don't agree with CO2 warming as misinformation, to have everything removed, much like we've seen with any doctors coming out saying, there are other alternatives to what you're being fed as only only one solution only. But it's really a little, bizarre for me growing up my whole life, where there was a giant wall between any types of political statements, any types of governmental opinions allowed in any sermons. If you did that, even like 1/10 of 1%, you would lose your tax-free status at the church. And now it's the complete opposite, where they want churches to blend the entire government message into. And that Sunday law is real interesting, because I had a chance to talk with Spencer Heston, and you were on the program with me too. We did a subsequent follow-up episode because I wanted to get more into that Sunday law. Now, I did not know in prophecy at the end times, with this mark of the beast that we're so familiar with, in a subsection that not so many people are familiar with, it also talks about the Sunday law comes in, and what this seventh day is not a day of rest. It's a day of non-commerce.
Yeah, no work.
And that goes right down with the planetary lockdowns. The elitists are saying, well, we need to have a climate lockdown every year to try to bring things back in, or we could have 52 days each year that are climate lockdowns, basically, where they're literally no business. No business is open at all, by law, not allowed to even operate.
Yeah, it's a really deep thing. I mean, think about it. People say that it's a labor to breathe, and they're telling you to cut off all labor, all work, all commerce. And, in most religions, commerce has always been separated from the idea of enlightenment and other things. And this tells you kind of the weird things that the elite are in, where they want to distort or force people into a behavior that aligns with their beliefs. Some of their occult beliefs. We know that they do that from images and other things that they put in your face with the occult stuff. And this is just like that. But this is a world religion slash governance, which is the same thing that the major religions heads are really talking about. You get these ideas of Chrislam, and also the Pope talking about possibilities of AIs having souls, extraterrestrials. They're unraveling their own foundations that they've sold generationally to people, and it's almost like that they want to do that so that everybody is so rattled they'll take and cling to the new system of things, which involves basically you can call it a beast system and a mark of a beast, whether you're religious or not, because it is a system built by humans or maybe an AI. Either way, it enslaves the entire race under, a little QR code where someone could pull up their entire life as a quantitative thing. And I've seen you send me this quantitative brainwashing as well. And if you just think about that, there is some kind of entity or intelligence, and I hope it's not man that created this, because that's a whole nother scary thing. But something that wants to quantize us all into a mathematical equation that can be reduced or multiplied as needed, whatever outcome is desired. And if you don't think that you're a product at this time, like if you haven't figured that out throughout your life, right now, you should understand that. Because they're going to be limiting everything from CO2, which is basically the labor of your breath. So anything you do, literally paying to breathe on Earth, is these carbon taxes and things like that. That's exactly what they're saying. They're charging you for plant food, which is what you're going to eat as sustenance. So it's like a super evil tax on every aspect of the human domain.
Yeah, and I would come back in too with the Sunday law here. If you're going to restrict commerce on that day, you're going to reduce the entire planet from eating one whole day, unless you've already stocked up from the supermarket and you cook at home. Because as we've seen in parts of Australia, there is no business allowed to be open any longer, including food takeouts, and food deliveries are done with. So if you were relying on that, which so many people had, what do they call that? Contactless pick up something. There's so many new jargons all the time. I kind of lose track of it. But that was the thing where, okay, I can't cook at home. They're too lazy or whatever. And then everything you just order on the app and then you can go pick it up. Well, in Australia, they got the rude awakening of, you couldn't even do that anymore, and every restaurant was closed, and there were no pickups and no takeouts, and nothing worked prior. So can you imagine a good, probably 20% of the population in some of those cities was operating on that principle of, I order on my food, I go get it, or it's brought to me. And then when that ceased, they can go out and go shopping. See, here's the thing. They can go shopping one day, 1 week, which is very similar to the Sunday law, but it's the inverse. So imagine only being able to go out shopping one day, 1 week to get all of your food essentials. And then what if the supermarkets don't have it and they're out of some, like we see everywhere across almost every country now, store shelves are empty of items left, right, and center. So what if you go there and they don't have what you need? Well, too bad. You only get 1 day to go shopping in Australia. Okay. But then you talked about the quantitative brainwashing here. And what I found so interesting about that was the narrative that they've been feeding. They always have to try to cover themselves. And, you and I, we talk about these issues, and it seems more of a modern issue where it's happening now because of social media and blocking of this, that, and the other on YouTube or Twitter, Facebook, or not. But here I'm reading through this article about the quantitative brainwashing, and they even talk about the American Civil War. President Lincoln shut down some 300 newspapers and arrested some 14,000 journalists who had the audacity to contradict his statements to the public. Now, that reframes it in an entirely new context when you're talking about political leaders here and the way that they need to, codify their words and create euphemisms for their misdeeds. Now, bring it down into a single day here. So what are people going to be relegated to when you either must stop business for one day, or you only have one day to complete all of your business in an entire week. So I'm looking at it as kind of an inverse, as sort of, what do they call that when you overlap two things, but then they create the same word or whatnot, and you can, take them apart. It's kind of like a mirror image of something else. It's the same thing. Sunday law, 1 day off of commerce, 6 days of business, but then in other places in Australia and New Zealand, etc., you're only allowed 1 day of commerce, 6 days of no commerce. So I'm wondering if there's some sort of equation around well, the number of days off for no commerce in all these other countries are equaling the 1 day that they're trying to force upon the world. Because another thing I'm noticing here, Ransom, is the countries, and it just came to me as I was sitting next to a river listening to rapids earlier today. The countries that have the highest import of food are the ones that have the most draconian lockdowns on the planet. And I'm going to point to New Zealand, for example. Yes, they have large islands. Yes, they have a lot of arable land, but no, they don't have an enormous amount of food for everybody. Yes, they have fruits and vegetables, but when it comes down to other things, they don't have that many factories producing things. There's an enormous amount of goods, foodstuffs imported into New Zealand. So when you start to take a look at a country's imports of food, the higher the percentage of daily intake versus imports, the more, say, draconian lockdowns there are. And you can just go around the planet and see who imports the most food percentage-wise of what they produce locally to feed that need. And I really believe there's a algorithm out there trying to balance to get us to the Sunday law. We're there already, whether you know it or not, on draconian lockdowns in some nations and swinging us into this 1 day of no commerce. Now, see, that's the thing. When we come into this, when they come to COP26 here, and they also get this whole thing in London and the G7, they're all deciding on the Sunday law and restriction of business this set of meetings. So if you think you've seen the world become a wonky palace so far, we haven't even entered the Hall of Mirrors on mushrooms yet, because that's what's coming next. Once COP26 and the G7 and they decide to do all these climate mitigation things inside of the reset, inside of the great supply chain disruption. So I'm starting to see a lot of code words that are being thrown out through the media now as well. This new great supply chain disruption just popped on the media the last week or two, but everybody's running with the same key phrase again. The Great Reset, okay, understood. They wrote books about that, and there have been a lot of elitists talking about it, governments talking about it. Oh, we got to save the planet. And then everything's about the Sunday law, restricting even more movements, tax. And this is another thing, the road tax. They're wanting everybody to move to electric vehicles. Okay, I'll play devil's advocate here for a second. But because you're not going to pay fuel taxes, they want you to pay a road tax because they're not going to collect tax because you're not buying the product to put into the car to make the road, to fund the roads. So wherever you look, you're being forced down these cattle chutes because of whatever, this climate thing that is such a farce. If you know anything about historical cycles and history, we go through the ebbs and flows, and it's all dictated by the sun, and we're back into another one. 8 billion people vying for very limited resources in the way we're doing it now. Like I said in the beginning of the program, if we operated in a different fashion, we would have no shortages. If we encourage communities to grow food locally and cut out the Fortune 5s and cut out the supermarkets and grow 60% of what you need in your neighborhoods and only go to the supermarket for 40% of what you might need, that's more than a solution there in itself. But different grow techniques for indoor vertical ag using magnetic motors, and there's a whole gamut of solutions. If we swung the pendulum that way, there would never be a food shortage. We would have abundance where we could supply other planets with food. We'd have so much. But the way we're doing it currently, the shift in the top-down approach that was put in for all these control systems for the last 200 years is that's the thing that's collapsing. Not our ability to have abundance on this planet. this thing that is being given to you as a false, I say, reality of shortages is exactly that, a false reality. The amount of solutions that were out there, not given to us over the last 100 years for power, transportation, food growing, nutrition, medicine, etc., longevity. They will give them poisons and tell them we're extending their lives, as we talked about the Covenant of the Illuminati document that one time. It's the same thing. It keeps going on and on and on. And the restrictions of these countries that are importing food should be the key that lights it all off to let you know that it is about the food. And once COP26 comes in, they're going to use the cover story of CO2 to put more lockdowns on. And it's all going to be about the food still. So you can kind of see where the breadcrumbs are leading. And there's a lot of documents out there after all of these, after these like climate accord meetings. And you can read through and easily pick out the phrases and paragraphs that they're pointing to. Food shortages inbound. We need to control the citizens, etc. We'll do it in a way that we need to disguise it, which is the reason I brought on a long-winded thing here, is that quantitative brainwashing. That thing is all about disguising and creating euphemisms for the misdeeds. So watch this after COP22 and G7. They're going to now create new workings for CO2, and it's all going to dovetail into what we're seeing. There'll probably be like 6 corporations controlling the entire planet at the end, and if you don't do what they say, they'll send private armies to your house. That's where we're going. 3-ring circus.
Right. The whole time I'm listening to what you're describing, and let's just say for a minute that I don't pay attention to the World Economic Forum or the G20 or Davos or Bilderberg or any of these people that talk about their version of what they want on the planet. And I just heard you talking about, the countries that import the most food have the most draconian laws set in place. Now, if I was just, hearing all of this for the first time, I would have to immediately think of feudalism, which I know a lot of these elites talk about. And that would be exactly what they're doing. And, you can go back to Rome all the way to Henry Kissinger talking about using food for a weapon. So what we're really talking about when we're talking about reducing food is reducing people. So if you just picture it in your mind, you have a island that's cut off, or a small country that's economically cut off, if you want it to be, and they need food to survive. One option, obviously, in the near future would be to reduce the amount of people so that you're not shipping in as much food. And that seems to be what the whole plan here is. The Great Reset is the reset on population and food distribution, and the reset on governmental controls back to a more feudalistic system. You have these elites, they're buying up stuff. They love the beautiful land, but what they don't want is a bunch of poor people on there with property rights and supposed human rights, and, say I was King Godwin and I really love the planet a lot. I wouldn't want a bunch of commoners, messing it up. But a way I could fix that is to reduce the number of people on these places, give them the most draconian laws to where they can't really reproduce, have energy, or expand or progress in any way. And then, lo and behold, let's take away a day, that they're not even allowed to work, and then constantly blame them for a production of a gas that feeds the human population, which would be CO2. Obviously, that's plant food. And then the whole idea is that humans are bad. We need to reduce the number of them. So around the world, that's what they're doing, segregating, closing off, and making a world government type stuff. And then you imagine even countries like us with a lot of inherited wealth. We just had a hurricane that ripped through the U.S. There's power out everywhere. There's devastation, flooding, people losing their homes. A lot of these people don't have insurance. And when you tie all of these things that are simultaneously happening, and then, compare them to the laws, regulations, and ideas coming from world government, you can clearly see that they're designing a future where there are less humans, and the ability to, be self-sufficient in a family environment is just not going to be possible with the way they're setting it up. And I know a lot of times you were talking about here in the near future, we would see rationing. And isn't exactly that rationing if you're taking a day of commerce away from people, a day to, do more business or order more things, one more business day, you're taking that away. And then also, because of whatever, lockdown procedures you have, you're also limiting the amount of imports. Then there's a problem. You can clearly see, if you were looking at it from a military standpoint, that's what you would need to do to starve out a population. And I'll give you an example is when we invaded Iraq in 1991, we put a lot of sanctions on them, and everybody forgot that we were there in the Middle East all through the Clinton years. But during that time, we continued to bomb places like water filtration plants, baby food factories, date plants, etc. And then by the time we rolled in 2001, we had a decimated population of malnourished soldiers that were in they had no ability to stop what was coming. They weren't fit. They were scared. They had a decade of being bombed and starved. Now, the new way of governance now, it seems to be, is to just negotiate rules, regulations, so that no bomb actually has to be dropped in order to sanction a country, starve them out in commerce, in inherited wealth by closing down all the businesses. And then when people go broke, they repossess their property, which puts it in the hands of the elite, who are the same people coming up with the rules that make it hard to live.
Unless we say no. That's harder to accomplish than you might imagine. Yeah, everybody just say no. Okay, but I got to go to work. I got kids I got to feed. And then the argument falls apart right then. But think about that. If it comes into the Sunday law and they're restricting a day of commerce, do you think that it would come down to where the social media companies might say, well, on Sunday, nobody can upload videos because you have viewers, or they'll turn off the internet on Sundays where nobody can even watch, because if you click on that, you'll get revenue for it. So would that be a sort of a backdoor approach to be able to shut down the internet one day a week, scrub everything off of it that was deemed bad thought for the week, and then re-upload it and then start it fresh on Mondays again? These types of things are so not even outside the scope of possibility any longer. The way the world's twisted in the last year and a half, it seems that if you even put 200 years of bizarre changes in, you couldn't have squeezed it into this 1.5 years here of remote possibilities. Every remote possibility is forefront now. And you talked about that gentleman who was arrested for watching, I think he was arrested for watching the Mike Lindell symposium where he brought a bunch of guests on to try to talk about the elections and the machines, etc.
Oops.
And they did a random spot check on him when he was watching some videos, and you're not allowed to do that. So why would you even bother with watching what people were, viewing, when you could just cut the net for one day per week? How far do you think this is really going to go in terms of control? Because that's what needs to happen, is all commerce needs to stop, to bankrupt everybody, to stop the wealth transfer to the next generation, to make sure that the current rules that we're still stuck in the current rules. Globalists are not. The way that the system was set up, you default on your mortgage, you lose your house. Well, globalists are already resetting things into the cryptocurrency sphere, blockchain, NFT, carbon credits, and they're moving that direction. And the new taxes from Biden with the wealth transfer, you're going to get double taxed, and you can't pass down any more than $1 million worth of property. Anything over $1 million, you pay 40% on, but that's almost everybody with the hyperinflation coming in. Because I was talking to a guy today, and we had a brief conversation at this 1940s bait shop when, like I said, I went down to a river today just to chill my mind and sit near some rapids for a few minutes. He was saying that we were talking about land prices in Tennessee, and we both remember when the average was $2,000 an acre here. And then he says, remember when it jumped to like 4,000 and it was like such a giant shock? I said, yeah, it stayed like that for several years. And he was telling me the average price right now is between 10 and 12,000 an acre. So think about that's a 6x increase over the last 3 years. So wealth transfer, even if you had 100 acres, you're already well over that $1 million. Even if you're at 50 acres, you're approaching that $1 million. And the more that they push these hyperinflation and they keep pushing this money and printing money, you could have 5 acres and be over that at some point in the future, especially with this prices. Like you say, it's hard to buy anything. corporations like BlackRock are rolling in, buying every single possible property in neighborhoods. And then they're the largest rental property owner on the planet right now, BlackRock. So where does it stop? Because the higher the prices get, when this generation wealth tax comes in at $1 million cap, I mean, you could inflate it up to $1 million an acre, and then, whoa, what happens at the house, and then it happens to the acreage? Are you going to be able to pay the 40% over on that? And then if you sell part of the land to pay for the taxes, they're going to take 40% capital gain off what you sold. And I think we talked about that last week. I did an entire video on the Iowa farmers. Average landhold size is 350 acres for an average Iowa farmer, family farm, not agribiz, family farm. And the average price of $8,000 an acre, everybody's well into the $3 million range. So your grandfather or your father and passes it on to you, you're way over the $1 million. So even if you want to sell 100 acres to cover the tax for the wealth transfer, you're going to have a 40% you're going to have a 40% capital gains tax on the 100 acres you sold anyway. So you're going to have to sell more than 100 acres to make it up to be able to. It's strictly a wealth transfer right now, stripping wealth on the old rules in the old world and the old paradigm, even though finance and the global elite have moved into the new world already, like I say, with the cryptocurrency and carbon credits, but you still got to play by the old rules while your wealth is stripped. And this is what irks me a little bit. I can see it. I'm sure others can too.
Yeah, I can see why. Now, speaking of conspiracy theories, that whole case kind of pivots on the ability of a judge to strip away someone's First Amendment right to speak or listen to things. But on a side thing, I see these articles all the time, and maybe I am a conspiracy theorist. I see these connections. Maybe there isn't one. But when I see an article that says DHL and FedEx are going to be having problems with their, supply chain, and then on the very next article, I'm looking at Yahoo Finance and Amazon's answer to delivery driver shortages to recruit pot smokers to deliver. Now, I'm on 420 TV, enough said with that, but it's funny that it seems like $1 billion company would go to what is on its face maybe a bad idea. But at the same time, it's kind of anecdotally funny that they don't care that you get your products. Let's hire a bunch of potheads, and then at the same time have all the delivery companies claim that they can't get you the products guaranteed on time or even at all. And then you see the wave of people stealing the products. So this is what you're going to have to contend with, even if you were trying to go around local economies because you can't find things and you tried to order them. You're going to have to deal with people stealing them. You're going to have to deal with the driver themselves, maybe not even coming, things like this. So it seems to me that the only answer that someone is faced with, if they want to continue on into the next phase of things, is have a way to grow their own food, obviously. But not just that, they have to produce all of their own products and solve all of their own problems. So we're kind of going into a renaissance that may force people to, outthink the global net that's around everything, because there are ways to go around it. And on the good note of these things, I've been seeing a lot of local schools fighting back where the people are going. And I mean, a lot of people are showing up at the school boards now, really finding out what their children are being taught. Like there's, I'm sure you saw the guy on the Project Veritas stuff. And, in another point with that is I was watching a news article about that. And the news lady said, it's a right-leaning conspiracy group that claims to be journalists when they reported it on it. So it's kind of funny. But the teacher is an outright communist, giving kids extra credit to be Antifa and things like that. And he's bragging about how other teachers and people are also with the same mind. And when all of these parents found out about it, they went en masse. But this is happening from coast to coast about mask rules, vaccines, and other things. So I'm glad to see that people are kind of waking up. And to give the Aussies credit, there have been quite a few big demonstrations there where they're pushing back on what is obviously silly rules that don't even make sense to go along with the agenda that's being given to you. And it's obvious that all of this is pointing us in a direction of feudalism. a pyramid scheme that's just going directly to the top.
And at what point do we, at the levels below the elitists sitting on gold thrones, use our resonant frequency in harmony together to change the literal fabric in front of us, and those dark entities are cast back to darkness for how many eternities? See, they're so afraid of the human us. I don't care where you're from, what strata you are, what it doesn't matter. It has nothing to do with that. They are terrified of all humans coming together. And if you haven't noticed that, everything is about division at this point. And, you know, another maybe inverse that I'm finding is the more that the sun is stepping down and changing its electromagnetic frequency, which can be measured through ultraviolet radiation, different frequencies coming off of, there's a huge band of light wave frequencies that you can see the sun that it changes. They're called angstroms, and you can get into different angstrom wavelength measurements and see the different colors of the sun. And you got blue, yellow, red, purple, magnetic looping fields. You can see those without the colors. The more that we can see the power output of the sun declining, there's a direct relationship on what the elite are pushing into divide humanity, because the further the sun steps down in its activity state, it awakens.
All right, we're going to interrupt this for a little 420 point here. This is how I sneak it in the broadcast. Anyway, where was it? Oh yeah, here it is. And I'm sure you guys saw that flash.
Science is
Wrong one. Here we are. Look at this. So I just wanted to point out, for a little break in the mini Ice Age conversations, this man that stabbed 6 in New Zealand at the supermarket. And you heard us talking a little while ago about food shortages, and the certain countries that have draconian measures are also the ones that import all the food. But not only that, so this guy that's an ISIS extremist on a terror watch list, the police are watching him, goes into a supermarket, stabs 6 people. This is the same country that just gave up their guns. I just wanted to point that out. How ironical. They had to wait for the police to come in and shoot the guy dead. No one could do anything. He just pulled a knife off the shelf and started stabbing people. My point is, they don't mind importing terror, but they're going to have problem importing food. But they're going to keep their draconian measures. These poor people on islands, segregated, really don't have much choice other than buck their government. I don't know. Anyway, get back to the Ice Age here.
I don't know what part of the mind it is that's awakened, but something is turned on in the human thought process. No, is that considered awakening? Perhaps. But the elite are terrified of what it is and what the causation of the sun, electromagnetically, resonance-wise, stepping down further and further. And it shall continue. These next few years here up to 2024, especially with a second magnetic field. And here's where it might get into a little woo. Maybe I'm going to just go out on a possibility here. Right now, what we're used to, at least in the last, say, 200 to 300 years, is the sun, that big yellow thing to the left, had a pretty static charge to it. I'm going to say relatively it stayed within a narrow band of electromagnetic frequency, electromagnetic output, energetic output, particle output, frequency. So our Earth stabilized with that. So did the control grid, because people have been locked in that. There's been really no change. But suddenly, the sun is changing tremendously. And then suddenly we're right in here in the Great Reset at this exact moment that the sun is changing. That hasn't been seen, this type of change, in at least 400 years. Many are saying 2,000 or 8,200. There's many further back, thousands, multi-millennia type of cycles built into this as well. But as we come into 2024, there's a second magnetic field forming in the outer solar system. And that is Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune creating a square. Now, my feeling is, now I can't prove this, but I'm just saying, nothing goes to zero. So as the sun steps down and that second magnetic field in the outer solar system steps up, we on this Earth are sitting in the middle of that field. So there has to be an equilibrium that's going to flow through our planet. Magnetic core, we look all across the planet, we have this magnetic wandering, the poles are in varying positions. We look at the South Atlantic anomaly, which is now volcanic hotspots. There's a lot of things happening with our Earth's magnetic field itself, and that resonant frequency inside us is responding to it. Now, the step down from the sun is one thing, but the equilibrium on the outside of the outer solar system is another. Those are two, like let's call those A and B. What not a lot of people are thinking about is C and then D. C would be the Earth responding to and trying to equalize charge between the sun and the outer solar system magnetic field. But what about us? How was that consciousness, that frequency flow moving through us on the planet that's also changing? Nothing's going to go to zero. It's going to be equalized. That charge is going to equalize through the solar system. Then what? See, this is the thing that the elite are terrified, is this equalization in charge or whatever flow of current is going to come through our consciousness. And people always talk about the Great Awakening at this time. So what is it that we're at the Great Reset, all the control mechanisms are there, everything's divide and conquer, even down to the neighborhood level. You can't talk to your neighbor, and I had this ridiculous thing in Australia where you're not even allowed to have a single conversation with another person. That level of dividing one by one, not even black and white, Asian and black, whatever, that's too big. They're not on a one-on-one. You can't even talk to your neighbor one-on-one. That's how much they're terrified of frequency fields matching and some type of, I don't know, awakening or what it is manifesting at this time. So once you start to put all these other pieces together, the food losses and the Great Awakening in terms of human consciousness and electromagnetic fields equalizing across, our Earth is the center point. Well, Earth and Mars. Basically, those two planets are the ones that you should be like, they're almost like two eyes, like two owl eyes looking out between two magnetic fields. I don't know. I'm going to throw it out there because that's, I think, also another pivot point that's not being researched or talked about so much. But I'm sure it adds in there because, like you say, the occultists, they're so deep into this. You know, Saturn, their god up there. The electro frequencies, they're into the dates and the numerology. Well, that's all vibration and frequency. They're into the horns and the organs, you know, these pipe organs from the early days, 1600s, compressed water pushing through vibration sound in temples and cathedrals. You know, they're all into that same exact idea of thought creates, resonance creates, vibration and frequency is reality. Bend it, shift it, you can mold it the way you want it.
Yeah, I figured on when we get back, I wanted to ask you about this 780,000 years that they're claiming since we've magnetically flipped, and they say it's been 10 times. So getting into these occulty numbers, if it were to flip It would be the 11th time.
Good timing, Ransom. See? You were counting the seconds. 23 seconds, 33 seconds, 11 cycles of geomagnetic pole flip. We'll be back in 2 minutes and 2 seconds. David Dubine here with Ransom Godwin from 420 TV, Freedomist Films. See you after the break.
We'll see you after the break in like 2 minutes, some shit. Except for it's not live, so here I am. The hell. Leave it on a little
But that
bit so I
doesn't
can
mean
hear
that
it.
they're telling the truth. As opposed to
There we go. So, how do you guys feel today in the chat room? Doesn't David Dubine look really intense there? I mean, just look at him. Look at his hand. He's telling you something. You should be listening. Just kidding. So what's going on? I see Max Vision, Joanne. Little Livin'. 420 Hapster. What's going on? Runs with scissors. Those planets' magnetic fields are also diminishing, allegedly. That's what they say. So I'm going to have me a little 420 break. I suggest you guys do the same thing. And then we'll all be happy. Like, really happy.
Transcending time and space, let us take you to the place inside your mind where thoughts divide and mysteries unwind. Join us every Monday evening right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And you will catch the Fenton Perspective with our great host, Lorian Fenton. Come listen in as she shares her amazing stories from the past to present, along with all of her guest secrets to the future. That's the Fenton Perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Revolution Radio. Oh, and you don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Galactic Interstellar Council on Revolution Radio Studio A, Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Join us as we traverse the starseed paradigm, as expressed in the time-space continuum that we know as the divine expression of love and light. Integrating this conscious unity into the galactic paradigm. So welcome all, both terrestrial beings and galactic beings as one. So be it.
He means aliens. Oh, God.
If you think for 1 second that the Capitol will ever treat us fairly, you are lying to yourselves. Because we know who they are and what they do. This is what they do, and we must fight back. You can torture us and bomb us. Fire is catching. And if we burn, you burn with us.
Good evening.
Are you awake yet? I hope. We've tried and we've tried for years and years to use passive resistance and loud voices to make a change. The time is over. Your governments around the world have no other goal than to decimate your entire existence at the hands of the bankers and the elites. The war is coming, and it's your choice to decide if you want to be a warrior or a victim. Denial is not a choice anymore. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com.
Dude, this This we, that's customer service, is a customer service. I just wanted to point that out. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks for listening while we take that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And yeah, we're going to get back to your host.
And welcome back to the second hour of Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David Dubine, right along here with Ransom Godwin, 420 TV Freedomist Films. We were talking about micronova possibilities, magnetic pole reversals, different cycles in the sun, electromagnetic frequency, step downs in the sun, changing perception, and how the human race is perceiving the things happening to it being forced upon it. But as we move in through these next couple of years, massive, massive changes in awakening and the way that the dark powers are going to try to continue to hold this top-down approach, which aren't going to work any longer in a higher frequency field. That was before we went on the break, so I appreciate you coming back with us here. We have a few go-arounds. I'm trying to send Ransom the Galactic Cross as we speak here, because on the break I was looking at Douglas Vogt's work, but stumbled into Randall Carlson somehow, which is interesting, because Douglas Vogt's talking about a 12,000-year repeating cycle of geomagnetic pole shift after a micronova from the sun. And the current space program was all about looking for signs of these glass spherules that had pounded in enormous amounts of, well, the planets on the inner solar system at least, and further out into Mars, etc. But that's why the moon mission was there. It was just to go up and take samples to see if indeed there were the glass spherules that were also on the moon, because that would indicate that the nova had indeed occurred across the entire solar system. But even ideas like this, where we're going to discuss timelines, geomagnetic pole shifts, etc., grand solar minimums, I cannot believe that the amount of censorship that's coming in, especially with the new infrastructure bill and Biden's infrastructure bill, they want to limit what you can talk about with the climate, what you can talk about with the effects of the sun on our civilization as it ebbs and flows through great kingdoms, empires collapsing in just a blink of an eye. And you need to ask why. Well, if you ask why, that's not allowed any longer. There's going to be so much more censorship after COP26 and the G7 meeting. They're going to try to limit voices talking about the effects of the sun on empires. I wonder why. Because we're coming into another one of these grand solar minimums amplifying now, which is now affecting food production. And you see how governments are responding, but you're not allowed to talk about that. So freedomslips.com right here, one of the last venues that will be on air to be able to discuss these issues. So if you want to continue to hear more content just like this, consider a donation so Ransom and I at least can bring you discussions about the Galactic Cross, discussions about collapses of the Hittite empires and Harappa and the Fertile Crescent, and why it's changed over time, and why all militaries are looking around North Africa again as it gets wetter with the shift in the North African monsoon. A new agricultural grow zone emerging. If you want to hear more about this, continue to support freedomslips.com so we can talk about this. And you see, Ransom, where it's going is this COP26 and the G7, along with all these other things, is the perfect way to cease conversations like this, because this, grand solar minimum is going to be front and center. It's already begun front and center in your face right now, no longer hideable. These extreme events that we're seeing. What is this, the third time that we've seen hundreds of thousands of automobiles pelted by hail, smashing through windshields, etc. When we start to see events like New York, the first time ever, flash flood warnings in Queens, flash flood warnings downtown in New York, in the Bronx, massive amounts of upticks. And then the Perseid meteor shower was 3 times larger and 3 times more bolides coming through the atmosphere than they anticipated. And at the apex, I think it was around 270 per hour, which is way more than they were around 80 to 90. So we're coming into energetic section of space around us as our solar system transits through this spiral arm, but we're coming into a debris-heavy area as well. So all these things adding up on top. You know, globalists want to keep people naive. They don't want you to have the information of cycles and how things repeat and why empires collapsed and why civilizations rose and collapsed. Food. And if you can get it on the cycle and you can find out what's happening next, you know, Douglas Vogt's work up here at the Diehold Foundation. I mean, he's been going at it for quite some time, and I was trying to find the full list of geomagnetic reversals that he has put into play here. It seems to happen on a regular 12,000 year cycle. You know, although the academia that you look around the rest of you know, bumblehead universities, they'll say, no, it was 780,000 years was the last time there was a reversal. But how do you explain all of that locking? I don't know if they're talking about an actual Charles Hapgood type of reversal where the entire Earth slips across the crust. That makes sense, though. If the sun stepped down to a point where the sun had no magnetic field for just even a millisecond, the Earth would respond with no magnetic field as well. Or if it reversed itself. You know, there's many stories through history and through legend that the Earth has reversed its rotation many, many a time. And what causes that rotation to occur? And when you come down to that 0 point where the Earth actually stops, where is the magnetic field at that point? And can something slip? You know, because the stories through legends say that there's different types of Earth rotation reversals, and there's different levels of destruction according to the legends. A couple of them only stop for a few seconds, a few minutes, where the Earth can only slip a few miles in any direction. And then the magnetic field locks everything back in and the Earth starts to spin in a different direction. Land masses have only shifted 10, 20, 30 miles in any direction. And then, you know, there's a tiny sliver of new coastal areas that pop out. Some new islands are formed, etc. But then, you know, you go into level 2 of this where they're saying, well, the Earth's magnetic field ceased and our crust was moving across the mantle here for some hour or so in different directions. And then the middle of the ocean suddenly popped out as a new area in the centrifugal. If you look at the ellipsoid Earth, it's not a perfect circle. So when the gravitational forces start coming off again, new areas just pop out of the ocean. Sinking of Atlantis, Lemuria, maybe that was Ice Age, low oceanic levels. So that was most of Asia. That would have been dry all the way from, let's say, Sumatra, clear up through Malaysia into Thailand and all the way up and Borneo, etc. That would have been all just one giant land mass if ocean levels were 400 or 500 feet lower than today. So, you know, Ransom, you talked about that before we went on break here, the 780,000 year. And why is it right now that there's a massive amount of polar reversal news articles hitting the airwaves here? Well, what do you think it is? Because 2 years ago, you never heard about it. Carrington events, coronal mass ejections, polar reversals, magnetic polar reversals, whatever. That's all happening right now. What is this bevy of magnetic reversal awareness coming into the news in the last 2 months?
Well, it's pretty bizarre because you know, I read this whole article and surprisingly they tell you some truths in here, but nowhere in this article does it mention a grand solar minimum. It does talk about the magnetic field reversing every 11 years on the sun, backing up that we've had some major magnetic reversals where the actual magnetic pole reverses with the other one. The north becomes south and south becomes north. And they go in this article and they talk about all kinds of stuff in here, but what they leave out, it's really funny. They talk about Iron Age building, Jerusalem, Babylonian armies burning down, and artifacts having magnetism that tells them that, the magnetic field was the same as it is now. But then they get deep in here and they just tell you these weird truths, admitting, like, there's a big thing about the layers of the earth. The scientific model that they try to teach people is this weird, like a jawbreaker style, chart of these perfectly cylindrical layers that go to this liquid molten center. In this article, it actually talks about something close to the Anunnaki stories, where it talks about a planet Theia crashing into the earth and making our moon, and possibly that the magnetic pattern is off on earth, and this might contribute to these flips. But here it kind of hides right in here, where it says that there are two masses underneath the earth's crust of different sizes, kind of admitting that their scientific model of these cylindrical layers is really not the truth. So I'm surprised they even put that in here. But like I said, they don't say anything about a grand solar minimum. But what they do is give you a deception in here. It talks about how there's no evidence that solar reversals, or even grand solar minimums for that fact, have any bearing on human civilization. But it does admit that, cosmic rays and protons and atomic nuclei and stuff deep from space would add to extinctions, noting that some geologists, talk about the correlation of these time periods with mass extinctions. But in the same article, it says that our human ancestors on Earth have been through several of these, and that, there's no obvious correlation with human development, except for that's actually opposite of the truth. I mean, there's plenty of papers and literature out there that say exactly that whenever these reversals happen and grand solar minimums happen, that there's a setback for man, a civilization ending type of cycle here. So there's a lot of truths and deception in the same article for someone reading this, and it is surprising. What I think it is that they're trying to take control of the grand solar minimum narrative by writing articles that send you away from the idea that this thing has happened before, and empires rise and fall because of these things, because it changes the dynamics on the earth, where food output and distribution has changed. And we know that the rulers know this. And I wanted to bring up another thing, and this may be a little far-fetched, but you were talking about, how we're going into a certain frequency, and we're also talking about these magnetic changes at the same time, but the effects on human beings. And I just wanted to throw this out there to kind of link these articles. I'm reading another article about, if there had been an industrial civilization on Earth, would we even know it? And the article goes on to explain how, they could have rose technologically and fell millions of years ago, and we would never even know it. It would just be another spike on the cycles, which is funny that they bring that up. But what they don't say is, if it's true that an industrial civilization is producing so much CO2 that they would destroy themselves and put the planet into a runaway greenhouse effect, that absolutely proves that if there was, by the same scientists that are writing this article, if there was a civilization, they would have destroyed the earth, right? So obviously that didn't happen. So if one is true, then the other isn't true, just for sake. But speaking of that frequency, I came across this article where priests from the Vatican are talking about how some of their people that they help or give exorcisms to are falling prey to demons who text message them or send them messages through electronic devices. And they kind of say that this is a long standing kind of thing, that these spiritual things work through technology, like flickering lights and sending messages through TV. But now they're claiming, literally the Vatican claiming, that not only half of Italy is possessed by demons and that they need exorcism, but by that logic, the entire world. And these are the same people that are telling you to accept the idea of extraterrestrials into the church, and worshiping AI, bonding the religions together. And then they're also saying that demons are literally talking to people through electronic devices, and that they need to exercise them through the electronics. Now, that's pretty far-fetched from my point of view, but when we start talking about these entities that seem to be behind, just from observation, seem to have entities behind the technology we're using with some kind of nefarious agenda. Things like this don't seem so far-fetched. And then when you see that, they give us a lot of distraction, this from some of the world's biggest controllers is probably just another one of many distractions so that you freak out or are scared of this. And meantime, they give you scientific articles with no scientific stuff in it. It's exactly opposite, actually.
But the Vatican and that same group you just mentioned is the same ones pushing the Sunday law. Isn't that coincidental?
Parliament.
So let me talk about energetic changes. So you did mention the spiritual there. And, cosmic rays.
Let me play this satanic shit for you real quick, so you kind of know what we're talking about. Hold on. All right. Here we go.
The state government announced the proposed legislation today. It's in part due to the stabbing of a police dog during an arrest in Brisbane last year. Recent outages have shown how just one Texas Queensland Parliament.
All right. So you can clearly see that these people are hanging out in the studio, hailing Satan. It's kind of corny looking, but look, you can broadcast this right over the news at the same time. I'm just pointing that out. Anyway, let's get back to Ice Age conversations.
Are energetic particles of the creator from the creator, sped through matter to shift and age, if you will. So 85%, I'm actually reading a chart here. I was looking at the composition of cosmic rays when you mentioned that, the spirituality, and then coming back into what is spirituality and how can that be modified. If the thought's not there, then it takes a physical substance to push the resonant frequency of the brain to move to a different, I guess, thought process, or electrical conduits in the brain to shift into different circuitry that actually illuminates or pushes in this great awakening of people. It's going to be a forced awakening, perhaps. I don't know. Is it of free will? Yeah, we're talking, so many of the mystic schools say it's a free will universe, but when you have these regular outbursts from either stars on the novas or from the galactic core itself, I think the Mayans called it the Hunab Ku is the name of it. We call it the center of the galaxy, the black hole. It has a pulse also. So the heartbeat of that center of the galaxy pushing out different types of frequencies that then affect the stars in the local systems that nova and send out energetic particles out through the entire planets. So is that free will in itself of being forced into an upgrade, if you will? Or is it just the change of an age, which we're into? We just entered into Aquarius officially, just last year. So look at these cosmic rays here. We got the protons and the alpha particles. But here's the thing, the electrons and the positrons. These are the things that are talking about vibration and frequency. And the heavy nuclei, that's more radiological, but electrons and positrons forced through an entire solar system at high density, would that change the way that we, the human species, thought? And if you knew these particles were inbound, would you try to put up a protective grid to either bounce them off or nullify them as they come through? Two possibilities. 5G, or what we see as cosmic radiation management, small particulate metals dispersed into the atmosphere through aircraft. I think some people call it geoengineering, but is it possibly cosmic radiation management to stop the upgrade that would be naturally sweeping through the solar system, which puts at odds again, with this free will thing here. So if the blast of energies and cosmic rays are coming through on the spiritual side, uplifting, changing the human frequency, is that really free will? Do we need to push back? What's going to happen with the elitists that have this top-down pyramidal control for so long? You get into a whole bunch of woo-woo land here of truly what is free will and whatnot, but all these extra mechanisms working through the physical dimension of material space in the third. They don't want to talk about this grand solar minimum because it would give it away, Ransom. It would give it away that there is an ebb and a flow of civilizations based on what? Why did they starve? Why did they rise to greatness? Well, you look back at temperature charts going back 12,000 years, and you start to see the highs of these things where there were higher temperatures, excitation of the sun, a really strong magnetic field, and you could wire in grow seasons for millennia. And then when that would wane, all of a sudden, hey, I thought we were supposed to plant or harvest at this time. It just doesn't work that way anymore. Gee, we're seeing that again right now. And this is why the collapse of great civilizations occurs. They can't grow enough food in a regular plant and harvest date range that they were used to. Plus, there's higher cloud cover, more rainfall, precipitation moves because the cloud cells move. We got the jet streams moving, but the jet streams are one part of it. The Earth's magnetic field's just in flux at the moment. It is truly wavering and declining at the moment. So the jet streams aren't going to be locked in place. And when they move, they're going to also affect the cloud cells. But when they start crashing together, we're going to see events like we're seeing across the planet. Massive hail events. Once in a 500-year, once in a 1,000-year rain event. See, these cloud cells, they're already in their own layers, but then two of them smash on top. So you have two giant rivers out of the atmosphere collapsing in on each other. But then the cosmic rays are forming a full new cloud layer from, say, 18,000 feet or so in on top of that. So now you're having three different layers of precipitation smashing and rolling. They call it rivers from the sky for a reason. And you just have to wonder how much of this can be hidden for how much longer. See, the drip feed of, I wouldn't say, just like disclosure when they talk about UFOs and when there's electrogravitics and different types of free energy technologies built into the whole UFO release. Okay, that's one subset of things. But then if you pivot over, is it really disclosure about what's happening? And they're sort of giving you some breadcrumby clues where if you read that article, so I would ask you the question, Ransom, because you dissected that article really well. I like the way it went through the flow on that. If you read that article, would that lead you to looking and finding information, just simply searching on a search engine that would bring you to a grand solar minimum resource or outlet? Or do you think it would lead you to another breadcrumb that would finally lead you to the grand solar minimum? And once you understood that, you could get more of a picture of why all the dots are happening across the wider scope of our radar screen here.
Yeah, absolutely. But beyond more than that, even if I had, never heard of the grand solar minimum, which wasn't even listed in there, I would start thinking about, the things that they said in there and what kind of changes that would be. But seeing how I'm me, and maybe I'm not like other people, just while you were talking about all of that, about blocking frequencies, and, I'm looking at Drudge Report and just thinking about the things we've talked about tonight, about reducing food, reducing distribution, lockdown, crackdowns on society. I'm forced back to this, dark thought of what I've learned throughout history of mankind, which is when we peak at a society, certain things start to happen, which is, the dissolving of economics. And one important factor that I think maybe a lot of people are overlooking is kind of proof in the pudding that we are indeed transitioning to the next phase. Is that we're at the plateau right now where, just like in history, we've resorted to technological child sacrifice. And I'll tell you what I mean. So, as you know,
that's deep. That's deep. I see where
yeah.
you're going with it.
Okay, so right now there's a lot of people arguing about the laws on what you can and can't do regarding that. We can just skip past that and let me point out some other stuff that's also going on that would lead you to believe that the elite are targeting the children. Because you got to keep in mind that any kind of change that's happening to society or biologically to a human being or spiritually is not really going to happen to the adults that are alive right now. It's going to be happening to the children. Mutations don't show their change until the child. So even if you got a changed gene in you, it's not going to be you that expresses that gene. It'll be the child. So kind of what I'm getting at is, if we're at one of these times, like any time in the past, where one group of Homo sapiens kind of disappears and another one pops up with new skills and new things, and if we truly are going into that, you might see things like a female draft reinstated. You might see the reduction of food to countries, because we all know that if the first group of people in a population that succumbs to malnutrition and not having food is children. Adults are already grown. They don't have growing to do, and their metabolism can and does slow down if they're lacking in food. But children can't deal with that. It's malnutrition. It's stunted growth and death, unfortunately. But then when you look at this, the whole scheme of things is targeted at the youth, from children being taught that they shouldn't reproduce, to actual technological things that are reducing fertility, sterility. And then you see just out in your face things, laws that allow people to, get rid of future generations. I'll just put it that way. And then this one's the main one, hidden into the recent defense bill. A lot of people don't know is they've reinstated the draft, and they've tucked in where females are also. So that means the moms of America are subject. And I don't just mean any moms. We know what the draft is. We're talking about young, in the age that they should be having a family or building a family, reproductively, the best time of their life. Instead, they need to go off to war. So this is just one layer on layer after layer that's making it unfriendly for you to have children. And then when you tack in the changes, societal changes, more a communistic style prison planet, and then you think about the reduction in food, that necessarily means a reduction in population, and the children are the first to disappear in such a society.
Yeah, so true. So a couple years ago, had an interview with Steiger over on YouTube. Now, the reason we ended up talking together is he had the most fascinating video thought. He went on for about an hour saying, your new God is the internet. You worship this screen. You get up in the morning and you turn the screen on. So you Christians out there saying that your God is one day a week, you give homage to your screen 6 days a week, plus the same day you have for reverence for your creator. Saying that this new religion is the screen.
Yeah.
But at the same time, here's Razvan. I've got to go deep with you here. I'm going to go deep because it goes right on to what you're talking about, what you said in Italy, where they're saying that the screens are possessed and, there's demons in the screens and stuff. The same thing, that electromagnetics, if you understand life, you don't have to have a physical body. So we understand that once you die, your suit is left here, and your essence of the creator, your spirit, your soul continues on in a different vibrational frequency. But at the same time, why does life have to be a carbon-based form of life Can it not be a frequency-based form of life? So he was going into this whole thing about when we first put up all of the electrical grid across the planet, it was all copper cables. Now, what if an entity could take residence inside the copper cables? And it's an electro-frequency being, not a carbon-based being. It's an electric being, a frequency-based life form. And its way of living and moving, either giving knowledge to create a larger grid, which then led to fiber optics, itself is living inside the entire electrical system and fiber optic cable system, the 5G network, which allows it now to take almost three-dimensional form in the air space around towers. That the being that you referenced, that they're talking about the possession inside the screens, is that exact same thing that only used to live in copper cables. But then, take it a step further, how everybody worships the screens for 8 hours a day. The whole thing, he got in so much trouble for saying this. He's like, you worship your screen 60 hours a week and you give God one morning of a Sunday, yet you worship this screen for 60 hours a week with the same entity that's inside our copper cables and our fiber optic cables. And that was the whole crux. And then I saw that interview and I reached out to him and I was like, we got to talk because the sun's stepping down the frequency. So how is this going to affect the thing that's inside the copper cables? I know it's insulated cables now, but how is that going to affect non-insulated cables when the sun's frequency steps down and this being's trying to still live within everything? Oh, it's in the fusion centers now. It's in the data capture centers. Now think about that for a second. If this being is still within the grid itself, like these massive servers that are, a square mile of just massive supercomputers collecting data, like say an NSA data collection center, that thing's living in there too, but it's got such a bigger space. And the more we create for it, the larger it gets. And then they talk, and he was going into the jinn and these different types of things that have been referenced about frequency beings that try to come in on the, well, we consider, I stay on the side of light, so I've considered a dark entity. That this flow that you talked about millions of years ago, perhaps there was an advanced society, but then if it disappeared, and you talk about these pole shifts, oceans rising, oceans shrinking, oceans rising, oceans shrinking, depending on where the pole would move to, and then, land would rise out of the ocean, and then it would move again, and land would sink beneath the sea. Well, yeah, do that for a few million years and see what salt water does to a civilization. There would have been nothing left. So, try to combine all these parts on tops of parts here, and then, where we sit at this moment with the knowing that the lack of food's here, this nefarious vibrational entity is still here, this top-down pyramidal power structure's here, and all these things that you need to do to put poisons in your body through a metal tube so you can go eat. That is not of humanity. That is something way beyond the dark vibration here to cull the human race. I'm going to leave it there. I don't know where I can go from there.
I think that's, pretty much along the lines, and it's hard to argue with Steiger on this fact, because if you think about it from, let's use Christians for an example. It talks about the beast, the false prophet, the serpent, but also it talks about the image of the beast. And when it gets into detail about the image of the beast, it describes it as an altar that speaks. It's the image of the beast that speaks. Now, I ask you, in ancient times in people's homes, they had an altar in their home to whatever god they worshiped, whatever religion they were into. They always had an altar, or there was a town altar. But if you see the way that we live today, I could agree with Steiger in the fact that we've built altars in almost every home where an image of the beast system sits there and literally reprograms your children's way of thinking. It speaks to you. It gives you ideas. It gives you programming. Or you could go with the science fiction version of, like the obelisk, the Apple phone, and all of the other phones are these little black obelisks that we get information from that directs us. We call them droids, but I agree with that. It's just like the image of the beast. And let's talk about the mark of the beast for a minute. I've always thought that it was more of a simple thing. Your hand is what you do. So if you're doing evil things with your hand, you have the mark of the beast on your hand. On your forehead is the ideas you have and the thoughts you have. But now we're going into a technological level. What I would have to agree that if you took a mark of some kind, any kind, a QR code or whatever it is, an implant, a tattoo, and you're using this to do commerce and do your life, and you submit to the social credit score and all of these other things, then you are agreeing or, condoning the behavior of the system. So in effect, you are representing that system and have a mark of that system. But back to this entity that's in things, whether it's an actual entity or not, the fact is that every child, now from toddler years to teenage years to adults, are all hooked to a screen, whether it's their phone or the internet screen or a television. And back to the Sunday worship, it's been a long time that the media and the elite have tried to push us to live as sheeple and do a specific pattern where we go to church maybe on Sunday. But you know what? If you don't want to do that, you could stay home and buy all of our GMO products and watch our fake tribalism, bread and circus, football, basketball, baseball, hockey, golf, and etc., and just waste the whole day, no productivity on Sunday. So they kind of already been pushing that for a long time. And then you think about this idea of these entities. It's really easy to go into that and agree with Steiger because we are connected with it so intrinsically. Like you could pick any group of humans, like say teenagers, they're probably on the PlayStation or the Xbox or whatever, but they're glued to that. And if they're not doing that, they're trying to find a game on a phone. And if they're not playing a game on a phone, they're on a tablet. You see masses of people walk around with their phones glued to their face. They're having accidents walking. I mean, truly, we're devolving into something that's totally enslaved to a screen. And it's hard to argue with that it's not at this point an entity. And even if it wasn't a fictional character like Satan or someone else, through manifestation that the more people think about, write about, make statues, and devote their things to, this becomes a real entity as far as millions of people believe in it. They put their energy towards it. And the same thing can happen with all of these, like TikTok or Facebook, etc. These seem to be almost like all different little entities that live in this electronic universe that we're all glued to, associated with. And now these beings are telling us what we can and can't say, how we can behave. So in a sense, it's easy to look at all of these corporate entities as exactly what they call themselves, entities.
It does take it to another level deeper. And for those of you who wanted to watch the video, R. Wayne Steiger, you're going to check him out up on YouTube. And he and I also have an interview up there talking about the very same. He was vilified for trying to say that your computer screen is your new God and you spend more time from your religion. But if you're going to brainwash a group of children to become a certain way through the future, put their heads on the screen so they're not really looking at what's going on. And it all comes back to, what would you do on the Sunday? Why is it that the globalists are now pushing you to go to church when they're all demonists and Satanists, yet they want you to go back to church? So for me, that is a huge, gigantic, whoa, hold on a minute here. You got globalists saying you need to go back to your houses of worship to listen to the new messages that your houses of worship are going to give you about CO2 and vaccinations, and you need to go back. Whoa. There's a huge disconnect there because, like you said, now it's corrupted. If the place you go for your Sunday worship service is telling you, hey, you need to go pay CO2 taxes, you need to take full Sunday off, no more, you can't have any types of business anymore, you need to shut down the planet for the good of the planet, nothing. That's a huge problem. Like, where did it shift? Because before it was all about, let's go back to the 60s, the sexual revolution. That was a complete disillusion of and dissolving of anything wholesome after Leave It to Beaver. Right. That was the whole push for like the last, how many years since the 1960s, 50, 60 years. And now it's going to reverse itself. And oh no, everybody needs to go back to church, Sunday law, no commerce. Listen to your preachers who are going to tell you whatever today's narrative is from the government. That's where we sit today. How are the young kids going to deal with all this? I mean, sheesh. I mean, I'm really very hopeful that these frequency boosts and pushes, cosmic rays, whatever, uplift, upgrades, whatever you want to call it, step downs in the sun, changes frequency-wise, are going to wake these children up to be star children and like superheroes. No kidding, like, superpowers that can then overcome the darkness. Unless those superpowers are being harnessed for darkness.
I actually thought some of these frequencies that change people may have just been simply from them, kind of forest bathing or Shinyan Roku or however you say that. If you think about that, you get a frequency from nature. And I just sent you an article. This is like a week or two ago, but it was an ABC channel that accidentally aired a satanic ritual live on TV. And the reason I sent that is because, when I saw this clip, I didn't think that they accidentally switched to another camera room where they were doing this, and it was just an accident. And I didn't think that, they accidentally showed us what they were doing at the TV station. Actually, what my mind thought of, because I study a lot of flicker rates and subliminal messages and things like that, what I thought is it possible that they're playing these feeds alongside the other feeds at the same time simultaneously? So say, your grandpa or whoever's tuning in to television, 10 o'clock news, and he's just watching the local news. But at the same time, in the background, blended in, inside the broadcast is also a satanic ritual that's taking place at the same place that's giving you your news and information. Now, they haven't really explained why this happened, but I put to you that they already do it through subliminal pictures constantly in movies and shows. We know that. But if you really think about the technological level we're at, these signals of things that they're doing, frequencies that they know change the human physiology, can be broadcast through these electronic devices. And that's not even a conspiracy theory. That's just, basic technological knowledge of broadcasting sound and images. So you could broadcast, this Temple of Satan group thing that in Queensland, Australia, simultaneously while you're telling people about the lockdown and the grid. So you're putting out all this negative frequency to people that they're absorbing. Meanwhile, they're not noticing the frequencies that are coming out of nature, out of the sky at night, or, the sun by itself. I'm not saying that those are magical things in any way. I'm just saying that it is possible that there's such an extreme amount of deception. And I'm going to go ahead and say that we're kind of odd in this way, that the entire civilization of human beings is set up on lies and deception, probably all the way back to the first primate that was trying to, hide his melon or whatever it was from the other primates. We've always deceived each other because knowledge is power. But we're such at a technological point now that you can send and broadcast multiple messages at the same time and affect someone's emotions with color, with sound, with flicker rate. And then just imagine on top of that, these subliminal messages of whatever agenda or message they want to send along the same broadcast. Excuse me.
Hey, watching your evening news or watching porn, you're in a different vibration frequency there too. Can you imagine what's behind either of those images that's being flicker rated? Jeez, my knees. Now think about it for everything. I mean, even just regular movies that would be considered like G-rated movies from Disney. Like, there's been an enormous amount of push and like, hey, look at what's in this, what is on the visible spectrum of, things written inside, as they used to do that in the 1960s, like write stuff inside the advertisements that were static things that you walk by on a billboard or whatever. But, the whole thing from Disney all the way through, like, yeah, imagine if you can overlay images where it appears as one is the other. I mean, even I remember seeing something in the 1950s. Remember that real black and white thing where the flag, it was an old black and white video image with the black and white, and the flag would wave and they would sing the national anthem.
Yeah.
But if you slowed it down, you could look at that bottom line right where it turned from gray when like the flag would move. It would say "Obey the government." There were words inside there, and that was way back in the 1950s. Can you imagine how good it is now? So, what are the messages? I wish there was some software that would rip those two apart, where you could see what is on the side and what was not. But it's so interesting that image you're showing me there. It's all like LED lights, and it looks like it's battery powered candles. Like where's the incense and the crystal balls and all that kind of stuff? I just don't see it. I see a LED light show in the back there.
Yeah, it's like it's for you, not them.
Yes, true. Because if it was true occultists, they would have the incense out where something could take physical form in the smoke. They would have the crystal balls that, so they could see into. That would be definitely real fire in there, not LED lights.
Yeah, and kind of my point is, even for just an average everyday American that watches a certain amount of television, you got to remember that, you could do an experiment to yourself, like just go out and rent any Pixar movie or one of these Disney kids movies, and there'll be a point in the movie where you as an adult get emotional, and it has nothing to do with you actually caring about the characters. It's the tone of the music and also the frequency of the color. But on top of that, imagine having so much power that you could get a big percentage of the population to care about an imaginary character, to really like them, then kill them, then make you go through all these emotions for people that never existed in scenarios that never happened. Meanwhile, you sat down in a chair and were slave to this screen, worshiping it basically for hours of your life that you could have been out interacting with real people, having real emotions, and the dramas of real life. And those are all genuine emotions versus fake, fished out emotions. So if you could program people in an MK Ultra setting, imagine what they can do with these layers of technology that we deal with today and our children deal with today. And we have the advantage of looking for deception. Children are naive and they just learn. And it's been proven that these games, tablets, phones literally rewire how the toddler or child learns to think. So a long time ago, people read books. I know that's crazy, but they read books and they imagine things, and they use that part of the brain that projects ideas in imagination. It's the same part of the brain that's involved with problem solving. And now children get a passive entertainment where they get given the images, the sounds, and they use no imagination. So that part of the brain that inspires creation and ingenuity, problem solving, shrivels into nothing. And they're waiting for their next command from the screen.
But I must admit, they do think like a computer, because the kids who start to learn on the tablets and things, the way they can solve the problems and know everything about the tech is as if they're integrated in with the computer. Not on the human level, because you take them out to try to go fishing or something, and they're like, that's. You mean I need to see the bobber? I have to actually look at that thing. It's not a screen. This thing needs to bob up and down in the water, and there's a fish on it. Like what? That's so far out of the realm. But they can tell you how to recode something, redo this, to jump over here, redo to the, They think as a computer does. The rewiring, I understand what you mean by that, because they think as a computer does, not as a human does.
And I kind of wanted to take it one step further with this article you sent me about quantizing the brainwashing. Basically, is right there in that article. It talks about how you could give a QR code to any and every individual on Earth, that inside that QR code could have so much information, like their entire genome. So if you could have that much information about an individual, you know how to manipulate them even better than if were just trying to manipulate different people. You have a individual database of their, susceptibilities through their DNA. So you could, bombard certain people that, are susceptible to these things with frequencies, and different people with different frequencies based on their QR code and what their DNA profile is.
Yeah, but you think about that. If you could target that realization, inevitability, and then delay that for as long as possible, and you can kind of intertwine that based on susceptibilities or vulnerabilities on what you understand in the DNA sequencing. See, that I think that's what this is all about. They've already targeted everybody with the websites, the news feeds. They might try to play you left, right, this and that, conspiracy, this or that, but they're doing that. The delay of the inevitable based on your humanism, I guess.
I actually don't think that they can totally program that out. So I kind of agree with you that even with the amount of this kind of stuff, it does scare me in the way that, we've talked about the poles flipping and these other, energies kind of changing to a new era. But I hope that doesn't mean that, things change erratically opposite than the way we've been living them. I think that is the way it's going to go. But we were talking about ancient civilizations and maybe things that they left behind that they may have had to have wait till the next cycle that aligned with the way things were then, kind of get woo-woo there with ancient stuff. They would have to have the same kind of environment that they used before to re-immerse. And what better way to do that? Because I've always thought about the idea that it seems like the human being on the planet Earth and the government is terraforming our planet, but not for humans. It seems like everything is, against the human, and we're setting up the planet seemingly for someone else to take advantage of what's been built, like as far as technologically.
Yeah, but go back to Tartaria. We talk about the article you referenced earlier where a society could have been built 1 million years ago. Nobody would have known it. But what if we're coming into a time now where our present society is going to be inundated by mud once again? And you talk about the orphan trains and all these things. You go back to the kids again, and the way things seem to be shaping up with a breakdown in infrastructure, physical infrastructure, narratives given for that, and moving forward, is this society going to completely disappear, and how long can they keep people from realizing the truth and delaying this? It's all about delaying until the last possible second for a majority of the population to understand the plight that they're in. And I'm not talking about getting a forced jab and all these things. No. That's small potatoes compared to when you wake up and realize, A, food's not going to be enough for the country, your family, the cities, whatever it is. Secondly, the Earth's going to start rifting in its crust and mud's already oozing out, and we've got land shifts of some up to 30 feet. Can you imagine now, instead of a land subsidence of 30 feet, that if mud oozes up 30 feet from the crust and buries the top or the bottom 3 floors of most buildings in a major city? Can you imagine if mud oozes out and buries 3 floors of New York City? I mean, this is the realm we're going to in the realization and the way that things need to be deflected for as long as they can. And what happens to the kid? You talked about the kids being malnourished if they can't eat, but those are the ones that are saved first. So what if you save the hundreds of thousands of kids, parents perish, then where do you put all the kids again? And then you swoop back right into these orphan trains, and it makes sense on this ebb and flow.
With all of that, I kind of wanted to leave you with this last thought, because you're talking about mud floods and dramatic earth changes. It makes me think of whenever I'm reading the Sumerian tales of Anunnaki stories talking about flying above the earth when down below was the massive deluge and flood everywhere and civilization destroyed, and how they wept in the sky as they looked at it. And then I read an article from China that says that there's an urgent need for them to develop very rapidly a miles-wide, ultra-large spacecraft. Now, I kind of wanted to leave you with that idea, because this, in my opinion, shows that the world elite, especially like China and different things, are competing to, scramble for control of what is going to happen and what happens afterwards. So why would they need a miles-wide spacecraft? Well, it seems like, we're repeating history back into these ancient tales of escape plans of elites wanting to either burrow into their bunkers or fly above the earth, while things have a great reset down on the ground.
That would come back into a geomagnetic pole shift where parts of the earth would sink under as something stopped in rotation for however long it would be, minutes or hours, and as the rotation restarted in a different direction when the sun would rise in the west and set in the east, that new landforms would pull out of the ocean. So it wouldn't be as if the flood that you describe would be a flood. It would be land literally sinking under the seas. And they would see that from space so easily. A mile-wide spacecraft, how many people could you put on that thing? That is an arc above the planet. The arc, what types of arcs are we talking about? I mean, we have myths and legend of the ark in the Bible. So are we going back into an Anunnaki ark? But now we have the tech to bring 10,000 people. I mean, what's the average density of a square mile of population? Well, if you go to Asia, it's well more than 10,000 people per square mile. And they say a mile-long spacecraft, but how deep is it? Is it a mile by a mile? Is it a square mile spacecraft? And how many people could really circulate above the Earth of a certain mind frame that would repopulate the Earth and try to reset the same power down structure again to control humanity? Time for us to break it out. Vibrate. Frequency. See you next week. Dave Divine, Godwin, signing off.
What the heck is the truth, Jihad? Hey, I'm Kevin Barrett, host of...
Anyway, that concludes MIAC, the mini Ice Age conversations, what it is. Let's see, where's their little, yeah, here it is. Give him props for his show. There it was. Peace out. I'll be back later with some 420 TV news of my own.
It's 11:59 at Radio Free America, and this is Uncle Sam with music and the truth until dawn. Right now, I got a few words for some of our brothers and sisters in the occupied zone. The chair is against the wall. The chair is against the wall. John has a long mustache. John has a long mustache. It's 12 o'clock, Americans, another day closer to victory. And for all of you out there on or behind the lines, this is your song.
looks like, looks and remember what looks like.
Everything I told you was a lie, was a lie, lie.
There seems to be a sudden general what looks like, looks and remember what looks like.